I woke up to the sound of wind howling through shattered walls and the smell of ash choking my lungs. My hands weren't my hands, calloused, scarred, weaker than I remembered. Through cracked walls, I could see empty streets littered with debris. The soldiers had already come and gone, leaving nothing but destruction. Inside this ruined hovel, a woman I'd never met stared at me with hollow, desperate eyes. Beside her, a boy no older than 6 clutched his stomach, too weak to even cry from hunger. "Day one," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They took everything. The soldiers, they came 3 days ago and stripped the village bare. Minjun hasn't eaten since. Everyone with inner energy fled or was conscripted. We're all that's left. 3 days. My wife, no, this body's wife, and son were starving in the aftermath of a military raid. Before this, I was a survival instructor for military recruits back in Korea. I trained men to live off the land in hostile territory. Now I was in hostile territory myself, trapped in a war I didn't start, in a body I didn't choose, in a world where martial artists ruled with overwhelming power. But I still had my skills. And somehow, I also had something else, a storage space that appeared in my mind's eye the moment I woke, empty, but waiting. I would use every advantage I had to hunt down food, whether it walked on 4 legs or 2. But that comes later. Let me tell you how I died. The rappelling anchor shouldn't have failed. I checked it myself, twice. 23 years of military service, 15 as a survival instructor, and I'd never once trusted equipment I hadn't personally verified. The recruits were watching from below, 30 meters of empty air between me and the rocky ground of the training canyon. I remember the click of the carabiner, the weight of the rope in my gloved hands, the morning sun cutting through mountain fog. Then the anchor pulled free from the rock face like a rotten tooth. I didn't scream. There wasn't time. My body knew before my mind did. That sickening lurch of gravity taking hold, the world spinning. As I fell, I saw sky, rock, sky again. The impact came faster than thought. I felt my spine compress, felt something fundamental inside me break with a sound like a branch snapping in winter. Pain, brief and absolute. Then nothing. Then everything. I gasped awake in darkness, so complete I thought I'd gone blind. Cold. Bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with a body that had been starving for days. The air tasted like mold and old smoke. Something was wrong with my lungs. They rattled when I breathed, each inhale scraping against ribs that felt too prominent, too sharp. I tried to stand. My legs buckled immediately. I crashed against a dirt floor, and the impact sent stars exploding across my vision. My arms were thin. Wrong. Where were my muscles? The dense, rope-like strength I'd built over decades of training? My hands shook as I held them up to what little light filtered through gaps in the walls. Calluses in the wrong places. Scars I didn't remember earning. Fingers too long, knuckles too knobby. These were my hands. I crawled to the wall and used it to drag myself upright. My joints screamed in protest, aching with the particular misery of prolonged malnutrition. How did I know that feeling? I'd studied survival in extreme conditions. I'd seen what starvation did to the human body. I just never felt it from the inside. Through a gap in the rotting wooden shutters, I saw a world that couldn't exist. Thatched roofs, mud walls, a dirt road where figures in dark uniforms patrolled with rifles slung over their shoulders. Their movements were wrong, too fluid, too fast, covering ground with an efficiency that made my trained eye narrow. And beside them, something that made my breath catch. A dog, but not any dog I'd ever seen. It stood nearly chest-high to the soldiers, muscles rippling beneath scarred gray fur, and its eyes held an intelligence that was deeply, terrifyingly wrong. The village had been ransacked. Doors hung from single hinges. Windows gaped like empty eye sockets. A cart lay overturned in the middle of the road, its contents long since looted. No smoke rose from any chimney. No children played in the streets. The few figures I could see moved like ghosts, bent, shuffling, avoiding the patrol's path with the desperate caution of prey animals. I found a cracked bronze mirror propped against the wall. picked it up with trembling hands. A stranger stared back at me. Sunken cheeks, a nose that had been broken and healed crooked, hollow eyes that should have been empty. But they held my own bewildered stare, my own dawning horror. This face was younger than mine, late 20s maybe, but looked older than I'd ever felt, aged by hardship and hunger and something else. Something like despair. Memories surfaced, not mine. Fragments of another man's life bleeding into my consciousness like water, seeping through cracked stone. A name, Park Dae-won. A wife, Yoon Sunny. A son, Park Min-jun. And shame. God, so much shame. This man, the man whose body I now wore, had been useless, weak, talentless in a world where inner energy determined worth. His own family had given him this crumbling hut on the village's edge because he was worthless to them. His older brother had taken everything, left him to rot. Then the soldiers came, and even the nothing he had was stripped away. Something pulsed at the back of my mind, a sensation I couldn't explain, like discovering a new room in a house you'd lived in your whole life. Flushed, empty, waiting. I reached for it instinctively, and for just a moment, I felt it. A pocket of space that existed nowhere and everywhere at once. A void that belonged to me. I didn't understand it. Not yet. Weak coughing broke through my spiraling thoughts. It came from beyond a threadbare curtain that divided this single-room hovel. Faint. Vet. The sound of lungs that had stopped fighting. My legs still didn't want to work. My muscles trembled with every step. But I forced them to move anyway, one hand braced against the wall, the other reaching for that curtain. The fabric was so thin I could see shapes through it. Two shapes, one larger, one impossibly small. I pushed the curtain aside. A woman sat in the corner, her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around a motionless child pressed to her chest. She was gaunt, angular, dark hair pulled back from a face that might have been beautiful once, before hunger carved it down to bone and shadow. Her eyes were closed. The boy's eyes were closed. Neither of them moved. My heart stopped. Then the child's eyes fluttered open. Dark, huge, staring at me with a hunger so raw, so desperate, that it reached into my chest and wrapped around something I thought I'd lost when I hit those rocks. The storage space within me pulsed again. Empty, waiting, full of potential I didn't know how to use. And I realized, with a clarity that cut through every fragment of confusion and fear, that these two people were going to die if I didn't do something. Right now, today, I had no cultivation, no inner energy, no power in a world where power was everything. But I knew how to hunt that I knelt beside them. Not the graceful descent of a man in control, but the collapse of legs that had already given everything they had just to carry me here. My knees hit the packed earth floor, and the impact sent a dull ache radiating up through my thighs. But I barely felt it. My training took over. The clinical part of my mind, the part that had assessed wounded soldiers in the field, that had calculated survival odds in situations where most people would have already given up hope. That part of me looked at this woman and child and began cataloging. Sunken cheeks. Pronocidor vital bonis. The skin around Sunny's eyes had taken on a grayish pallor that I recognized immediately. Severe dehydration. Her lips were cracked, peeling, the kind of damage that took days of inadequate water intake to develop. The boy, Min-jun, the memories whispered, was worse. His breathing was too shallow, too fast. The small chest rose and fell in rapid little hitches, his body working overtime to compensate for the resources it no longer had. When he'd opened his eyes to look at me, there had been a delay, a lag between the movement and the focus. Neurological sluggishness. I'd seen it before, in refugees, in survivors of sieges, in people whose bodies had begun consuming themselves just to keep the heart beating one more hour. 48 hours, maybe less. If this child didn't get food and clean water soon, his organs would begin shutting down. The kidneys first, usually, then the liver. By the time the heart stopped, he would already be gone. When did you last eat? My voice came out wrong. Rougher, deeper, scraped raw by whatever had happened to this body before I arrived in it. The words felt foreign in my mouth, shaped by vocal cords I didn't recognize. Sunny flinched. It was a small movement. A tightening of the shoulders, a slight withdrawal of the head, the kind of instinctive recoil that came from expecting pain. She'd flinched from her husband's voice. What kind of man had the original day one been? 3 days. Her whisper was barely audible. Before the collection, we had half a bowl of rice. For June. 3 days. 3 days of nothing. But whatever water they could scavenge, and even that had probably been limited, the village well would have been contaminated by now. Standard military practice. Poison the water sources you can't control. Force the population to depend on what you provide. The soldiers, I said. When exactly? 2 days ago. Sunny's eyes remained glazed, fixed on some middle distance that existed only in her memory. They came at dawn. The black talon. They went through every house. Took everything. Rice. Dried fish. The chickens. Even the seed grain for next season's planting. Her voice cracked on the last word. Seed grain. The villagers' last hope of recovering from this. Gone. I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the protests of muscles that clearly hadn't been used properly in weeks. The hut was small, 1 room, perhaps 4 meters by 3, with a cooking pit that had gone cold and a sleeping area where Sunny and Minjun huddled together for warmth despite the mild weather. I searched it anyway. Military thoroughness. Every container opened. Every loose floorboard tested. The grain jars by the cooking pit were empty, scraped so clean that someone had licked them. A water gourd held perhaps 2 mouthfuls of liquid that had already begun to develop an off smell. Under the 3rd floorboard from the wall, I found it. A single dried radish root, brown and shriveled, no bigger than my thumb, hidden in a small hollow that the soldiers had missed. Sunny must have secreted it there before the raid, a final desperate reserve. It would provide perhaps 50 calories, enough to keep a child's stomach from eating itself for another few hours. Nowhere near enough. Other family, I said, returning to kneel beside them. Your parents? Brothers? Anyone who might, dead. Sunny's voice had gone flat. The endless conflict took my father 7 years ago. My mother died in the fever that swept through 2 winters past. A pause. My sister was taken by the last conscription. What about my family? The words felt strange. My family. This body's family. The distinction still confused me. The boundaries between inherited memory and lived experience blurring at the edges. Sunny's expression changed. The glazed resignation cracked, and something harder emerged beneath. Something that looked almost like hatred. Your brother. She said the word like a curse. Dong Cheol inherited the main house when your father died. The food stores. The good land. Everything. Her jaw tightened. He told the Black Talon where to look. Which families had hidden reserves. Who had been hoarding. My stomach dropped. He told them to raid this hut first. Said. Her voice caught, and for a moment I thought she might cry. Instead, she swallowed it down. Said the second son was worthless anyway. That we probably had nothing. But they should check thoroughly just to be sure. Through the window, if you could call the gap in the damaged wall a window, I could see the village square. And there, standing in the late morning light with the casual arrogance of a man who had found his place in the new order, was a heavy-set figure in his early 30s. Soft hands, a perpetual sneer, accepting a wrapped parcel from a Federation soldier, while laughing at some shared joke. Dong Cheol, my brother, the man who had sentenced his own family to starvation to curry favor with the occupiers. Something cold settled into my chest. Not rage. Rage was hot, impulsive, the kind of emotion that got people killed. This was different. This was the quiet certainty of a man who had just identified an enemy and filed that information away for future use. One day, Dong Cheol would answer for this. But not today. Today, there was only one thing that mattered. I pressed the dried radish into Sunny's hand. Her fingers were skeletal, the bones too prominent beneath papery skin. Small pieces, I said. Let him suck on them before he tries to chew. His stomach won't be able to handle anything substantial. Sunny stared at the root like I'd handed her gold. Where are you going? I was already moving toward the door, testing the limits of this weak body, calculating how far I could push it before collapse. To hunt. Behind me, I heard Sunny break the radish into fragments. Heard the small sound of Minjun accepting a piece into his mouth. Then I heard the crying. Not loud. Not the wailing of a child throwing a tantrum. These were silent tears, the kind that leak from eyes too exhausted to do anything else, accompanied by weak, frustrated sounds. As Minjun tried and failed to chew, I turned back. The boy's jaw was moving, but there was no strength behind it. The dried radish, which should have softened with saliva, which any healthy child could have managed easily, sat in his mouth like a stone. He didn't have the energy to break it down. He was too weak to eat. I knelt beside him again, and this time the cold determination in my chest mixed with something else, something that felt like desperation. The storage space inside me pulsed. Empty, mocking. A dimensional pocket that could preserve food indefinitely, that could have held enough supplies to keep this family alive for months, if only I had anything to put in it. Minjun's tears traced silent paths down cheeks that had lost their childhood roundness. Hours. I had hours at most. And in a world where martial artists commanded power, where even the weakest cultivator could crush me without effort, I had nothing but knowledge trapped in a body too weak to use it. The patrol came at the same time they had yesterday. I watched them through the gap in the shutters. Two soldiers in black uniforms moving down the village's central path with the casual arrogance of men who owned everything they surveyed. Their boots kicked up dust that hadn't seen rain in weeks. One of them laughed at something the other said, and the sound carried across the dead silence of Hyukshin village like a slap. Behind me, Minjun had finally fallen into a shallow sleep. His breathing was too fast, too labored. The single bite of preserved rat meat sat in his stomach like a promise, proof that food existed, that survival was possible. But one bite wasn't enough. One bite was almost worse than nothing at all, because it reminded a starving body what it was missing. Sunny stood at the far wall, her arms wrapped around herself, watching me watch the soldiers. They always take this route. I murmured, more to myself than to her. Same time, same path. Every day since the raid. Her voice was barely above a whisper. They check the main road, then loop back through Elder Huang's property. Takes them about 2 hours to complete the circuit. 2 hours. That was a window. That was a chance. I turned from the shutters. I'm going into the ashfall woods. Sunny crossed the room faster than I would have thought possible for someone in her condition. Her fingers closed around my wrist, and despite everything, despite the malnutrition, despite the exhaustion carved into every line of her face, her grip was iron. You can't. If I don't, Minjun dies. Tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning, if we're lucky. But if you go into those woods, you die. Her eyes searched my face, looking for something. Recognition, maybe some trace of the passive, broken man who had occupied this body before I arrived. The soldiers shoot anyone caught foraging. They've made examples of 3 families already, hung them from the old temple gate, and left them there for the crows. Then I won't get caught. It's not just the soldiers. She released my wrist, but didn't step back. The war dogs. The Federation brought them in 6 months ago. Massive things, bred for violence, fed on. They say the handlers feed them human flesh to make them aggressive. The dogs have gone feral in the woods. They hunt in packs now, and are not afraid of people anymore. Dogs. The memory of military working dogs surfaced in my mind. German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, animals trained to track and kill. But in this world, with ambient chi saturating everything. How big? Sunny's face tightened. Baek Sung-ho went into the woods last month with his 2 sons. They were hunters before the war, knew the forest better than anyone. She paused. Only Sung-ho came back. He was missing his right arm at the elbow, and he doesn't speak anymore. Just sits in his hut and stares at the wall. 3 men, experienced hunters. 1 survivor, mutilated and broken. What else? I asked. She blinked. What? What else do you know? Patrol schedules. Routes they avoid. Wildlife sightings. Anything. For a long moment, Sunny just stared at me. Something shifted in her expression. Confusion giving way to a different kind of attention. Whatever she saw in my face now, it wasn't what she was used to seeing. The soldiers don't patrol the eastern approach, she said slowly. The terrain is too rough for their formation movement. Lots of ravines, unstable ground from the volcanic activity. They lost a man there 2 weeks ago. He fell into a crevasse and broke both legs. The screaming lasted 3 hours before someone put him down. Eastern approach. Route terrain. I could work with that. What about the war dogs? You said they hunt in packs. Mostly near the northern clearing. That's where the Federation set up a temporary camp during the raid. They left. Remains. The dogs keep coming back to it. And their handler? You mentioned someone named Voke. Sunny's face went pale. Sergeant Volkheisen. He's not just a handler. He's a martial artist. Chi gathering stage, maybe higher. He patrols the forest edge at dawn and dusk with his war dog. A massive black thing called Fenris. She shuddered. The dog is almost as big as a man. It killed old grandmother Cho where she tried to gather mushrooms at the treeline. Just tore her apart, while Voke watched and laughed. Dawn and dusk. The patrols on the main road happened midday. That meant the mornings and evenings were guarded by something far more dangerous than ordinary soldiers. I glanced toward the shutters. The sun hung at its peak, washing the village in harsh, unforgiving light. I go now, I said, while Voke is resting and the regular patrol is on the main road. Day 1, there's no other choice. I met her eyes, and I let her see it, the cold calculation, the acceptance of risk. I know what I'm doing. Before I was trained for this. Survival in hostile territory. Moving without being seen. Reading terrain and wildlife patterns. I reached out, gripped her shoulder. Trust me. The words hung between us. Trust. Such a simple request. Such an impossible ask, given that the man she married had apparently spent the last year proving himself utterly unworthy of it. But what choice did she have? 2 hours, she whispered. The patrol returns in 2 hours. I nodded once, then moved to the door. The gap between our hut and the treeline was perhaps 200 meters of open ground. In my old body, I could have crossed it in under a minute, low crawl, using every depression and patch of tall grass for cover. Quick, efficient, silent. This body made me feel like I was dragging a corpse. Every movement cost me. My legs trembled. After the first 50 meters, my breath came in ragged gasps that I had to consciously suppress. The silent movement techniques I knew by heart, weight distribution, breath control, environmental awareness, fought against muscles that had forgotten how to obey. I reached the treeline drenched in sweat, my arms shaking, my vision swimming at the edges. The ashfall woods swallowed me whole. Dark volcanic soil cushioned my footsteps, absorbing sound in a way that felt almost unnatural. Towering pines rose around me like the pillars of some ancient cathedral, their branches so thick overhead that the midday sun became a distant memory. The air tasted of ash and old rain and something else, something metallic that I couldn't quite identify. And the silence. Artillery rumbled somewhere to the east, a reminder that the war continued beyond this pocket of devastation. But within the woods themselves, nothing stirred. No vibración, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just that heavy, watching quiet. My training kicked in despite my body's protests. Boar tracks. Fresh ones pressed deep into the soft soil. A large animal, probably male, moving northwest. I filed the information away. Boars meant meat. Lots of it. But also danger. A wounded boar could kill a healthy man, and I was far from healthy. Rabbit runs. Thin trails through the undergrowth where small bodies had pressed the vegetation flat. Rabbits meant snares. Snares meant protein without the risk of direct confrontation. I marked the locations in my mind. And then I dropped to a crouch, my heart suddenly pounding. Boot prints. Military issue, the tread pattern distinctive even in this dim light. Fresh. Maybe an hour old, maybe less. A single set, heading deeper into the forest along a path that suggested purpose rather than patrol. Someone was in these woods. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here, based on the patrol schedules Sun E had described. I followed the tracks at a distance, staying low, forcing my exhausted body to maintain the silent movement it was screaming to abandon. The trees grew thicker. The silence grew heavier. My storage space pulsed faintly in the back of my mind. Empty, waiting, useless until I found something worth preserving. Then I heard it. A growl, low and rumbling, that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I froze behind a fallen log, peering through a gap in the rotting bark. The war dog emerged from the underbrush 30 meters ahead. Fenris. It had to be Fenris, because nothing natural could be that large. The beast was massive, easily the size of a small pony, its black fur matted with blood and mud. But something was wrong. It moved with a pronounced limp, favoring its left side. Its right hind leg dragged behind it, the fur slick with fresh blood from a wound I couldn't quite see. Injured, separated from its handler, alone, and directly between me and the patch of wild root vegetables I'd spotted at the edge of a small clearing, the only edible vegetation I'd seen since entering the forest. Fenris's head swung toward my position. Its nostrils flared, and it began to growl. The growl rolled through the underbrush like distant thunder, low and constant, vibrating in my chest before it reached my ears. Fenris's yellow eyes locked onto my position with the focus of a predator that had found wounded prey. 40 kilos, maybe more. Even injured, even limping, that thing would tear through my malnourished body like paper through flame. Every instinct screamed retreat. Fall back. Circle around. Find another path, another food source, another way. But there was no other way. I had searched for 3 hours and found nothing but poisonous berries and inedible bark. Those root vegetables in the clearing behind the dog represented the difference between my son eating tonight and my son growing weaker by the hour. Between Sonny having the strength to boil water and Sonny collapsing beside the cold hearth. The math was brutally simple. Retreat equaled failure. Failure equaled starvation. I could not afford to lose. Moving with excruciating slowness, I eased backward from the fallen log. Fenris's head tracked my movement, but the beast didn't charge. Not yet. It was testing me, evaluating whether I was threat or prey. Military conditioning ran deep in war dogs. They didn't waste energy on targets that might not be worth killing. I needed weapons. I needed a plan. I needed to stop my hands from shaking. The branch I found was thick, as my wrist, roughly 1.5 meters long, with enough weight to carry force behind a thrust. I pressed it against the edge of a volcanic rock, scraping back and forth until the tip formed something resembling a point. Not sharp enough to penetrate deep, but maybe sharp enough. The vines came next. Twisting them into a snare took precious minutes, while Fenris's growl echoed through the trees, constant and patient. My fingers fumbled with knots that should have been automatic. This body had never done this work before. The muscle memory existed in my mind, but not in these unfamiliar hands. Come on, come on. The snare wasn't elegant. It was barely functional. But I positioned it across the narrowest point of a nearby game trail, where the underbrush formed natural walls on either side. If Fenris charged through there, if the loop caught its injured leg, if the vine held for even a second, too many variables. Too much uncertainty. But certainty was a luxury for people who weren't starving. I picked up a stone and hurled it toward a cluster of dried leaves. The crack of impact echoed through the silent forest. Fenris exploded forward. The dog moved faster than its injury should have allowed, driven by trained aggression that overrode pain. It crashed through the underbrush directly toward the sound, directly toward the game trail, directly toward. The snare missed. The loop caught nothing but air as Fenris barreled past it, and then the beast was changing direction, its nostrils flaring. As it caught my actual scent, and it was coming straight at me, I planted my feet, raised the spear, aimed for the throat. My body betrayed me. The thrust went wide. As my leg buckled, this damned, malnourished leg that couldn't hold its own weight under pressure, and Fenris was inside my guard before I could recover. Jaws like a steel trap closed around my left forearm, and pain whited out my vision. The scream that tore from my throat sounded foreign. Animal. I felt teeth grind against bone, felt hot blood streaming down my wrist, felt the dog's weight dragging me toward the earth. Training. Training. What did training say about dog attacks? The answer surfaced through the agony. Don't pull away. The instinct was to wrench free, but that would let the dog reposition for a killing bite. Instead, I shoved my arm deeper into Fenris's mouth. The beast choked, gagged, its jaws forced open by the meat of my forearm wedging against its throat. For half a second, the pressure released. Half a second was enough. My right hand found the spear where it had fallen. I brought it up in a desperate arc, driving the crude point into the soft tissue beneath Fenris's jaw with every ounce of strength this broken body possessed. The spear punched through. Fenris made a sound that wasn't quite a yelp and wasn't quite a gurgle. Hot blood sprayed across my face, metallic and thick. The dog's body spasmed once, twice, then collapsed directly on top of me. I lay there in the volcanic soil, pinned beneath 40 kilos of dead weight, my arm still trapped in the beast's slackening jaws, my blood mixing with its blood in the black earth. I was alive. I was alive, and something in my chest was screaming at me to move, to run, because Fenris? Fenris. The voice came from somewhere behind me. 20 meters, maybe less, crashing through the brush with no attempt at stealth. I went limp. The soldier burst into view seconds later. Young, barely 20, with the soft features of someone who hadn't been at war long enough to lose them. He held a rifle in shaking hands, sweeping the muzzle across the trees before it settled on the pile of dog and peasant bleeding into the dirt. You piece of... He didn't finish the curse. His voice cracked with something that might have been grief. As he approached, kicking Fenris's corpse hard enough to shift the weight on my chest. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Let my eyes stay half-lidded, my body loose, my blood pooling beneath me. The soldier crouched down, reached toward my throat to check for a pulse. My fingers had already closed around fist-sized stone. When his face came close enough, I moved. The stone connected with his temple with a sound I would never forget, wet, hollow, final. The soldier's eyes went wide for a single heartbeat before the light left them entirely. He crumpled beside his dog, and the forest fell silent. I lay there, chest heaving, staring at the first human I had ever killed with these borrowed hands. And deep within my storage space, something stirred. Something that had been dormant, waiting, shifted in the darkness like a sleeping beast finally catching the scent of blood. A threshold had been crossed. The soldier's blood cooled against my skin, while the forest held its breath around me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear. I processed that already, filed it away in whatever mental compartment soldiers learn to build. No, this was pure physiology. A starving body pushed past its limits, adrenaline flooding through veins that had nothing left to burn. I watched my fingers tremble over the dead man's chest and forced myself to think like the instructor I used to be. Work the problem. Survive now. Feel later. His knife came first. A good blade, Woolsung military issue, the steel holding an edge that spoke of regular maintenance. As my fingers closed around the leather-wrapped handle, something inside me responded. That hollow sensation behind my navel, the storage space, open like a door swinging wide in complete darkness. I focused on the knife, willed it to move. It vanished from my grip, simply ceased to exist in my hand, in the world, in any place my eyes could reach. But I could feel it, somewhere impossibly close and infinitely far. The blade waited in perfect stillness. I thought about holding it again. The knife reappeared, cold metal pressing against my palm, as if it had never left. The sensation nearly buckled my knees, not from effort, but from the sheer wrongness of what I'd just done. In a world where men trained for decades to manipulate chi, where martial artists could shatter stone and outrun horses, I had stumbled into something that broke every rule of physics I understood. Later. Process it later. The soldier's canteen still held water. His belt pouch contained dried meat rations. Maybe 2 days' worth for a healthy man, a week's careful portion for a starving child. His outer jacket would hide the blood soaking through my shirt. Each item I touched, I tested. Each item vanished into the darkness behind my navel and waited there. Taking no weight, occupying no space in the physical world. Fenris lay, cooling beside his master, 70 pounds of meat that could sustain my family for weeks. I couldn't carry him whole. My borrowed body wouldn't survive that journey, even empty-handed. The soldier's knife worked better than I expected. I'd field-dressed hundreds of animals in my previous life, taught the technique to soldiers who complained about the smell and the mess. Now, those same hands, weaker, thinner, trembling with exhaustion, remembered the motions even when the muscles screamed. Haunches first. The rear legs held the most meat, dense protein that Minjun's starving body needed. Then the liver, iron-rich and soft enough for a child who'd forgotten how to chew. I wrapped each cut in broad leaves torn from nearby ferns, creating neat packages that vanished one by one into my storage space. The sensation was becoming familiar, almost natural, like remembering a skill I'd always possessed, but never named. I took everything worth taking: the heart, the kidneys, strips of flank meat that would cook quickly over a small fire. The storage space accepted it all, preserving organic matter in that lightless void where time seemed to mean nothing. The soldier's body was harder. He weighed maybe 180 pounds, not a large man by military standards, but heavier than my borrowed body could drag without attracting attention or destroying what remained of my strength. I found a ravine 20 meters from the killing ground, its bottom hidden by accumulated brush and deadfall. Rolling him over the edge took everything I had left. Covering the body with branches took everything. After that, not perfect. If Heisen's men searched carefully, they'd find him. But I couldn't do perfect. I could only do enough. The journey home stretched across eternity. Sunny had mapped the patrol gaps in her mind. 3 hours between sweeps on this section of the border. Give or take the unpredictability of bored soldiers. I'd use maybe an hour and a half for the hunt and the butchering. That left time, but not comfort. Every step cost me something I couldn't afford to spend. My wounded arm burned with infection already setting in, the dog's teeth having torn deeper than I'd first assessed. My legs shook with each rise in the terrain. My vision kept narrowing at the edges, darkness creeping in like hungry wolves. But I carried nothing. That truth alone pulled me forward through the pain. The meat, the knife, the rations, the canteen, all of it stored away in that impossible space behind my navel, weighing nothing, invisible to anyone who might stop me. I looked like a wounded villager stumbling home. After a fall, not a hunter, not a killer, not the man who would tear this world apart to feed his son. The hut materialized through the tree line. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the ruins of Hyukshin village, I timed my approach to the gap Sunny had described, moving when the distant patrol route curved away from our corner of the settlement. The door creaked open. Sunny's gasp caught in her throat. I looked worse than I felt, which was saying something. Blood soaked through the soldier's jacket. More blood crusted on my face from where I'd wiped my hands without thinking. My wounded arm hung useless at my side, and the rest of me swayed like a man already dead. But then I focused on the storage space, reached in with my mind, and withdrew a leaf-wrapped package of dog haunch, still fresh, still perfect, impossible meat materializing from empty air. Sunny's eyes went wide. "How, don't ask." My voice came out, as gravel scraping stone. "Please, don't ask where it came from." She didn't. Something in my expression killed the questions before they could form. Instead, she took the meat with hands that trembled worse than mine, and I saw hunger override everything else in her face. The same hunger that had driven me into those woods. The same hunger that had made me kill. I collapsed against the wall while she worked. The fire was small, carefully controlled to minimize smoke. She'd learned that trick in the 3 days since the raid. Learned it through fear and observation. The meat sizzled softly, and the smell filled our broken home like a promise of something better than death. Minjun emerged from his corner of the room. I'd seen the boy before, a peripheral awareness, a shape huddled under thin blankets, a small body slowly consuming itself. But now, for the first time, I truly watched him. 6 years old, eyes too large for his gaunt face. Hands so thin the bones showed through the skin. those eyes fixed on the cooking meat with a desperation that broke something inside me. Sunny portioned carefully. A small piece first, cooled against the plate, tested on her own tongue to ensure it wouldn't burn him. Then she held it out to her son, their son, my son now, and he took it with fingers that couldn't stop shaking. He ate slowly, carefully, as if he'd forgotten how. As if his body had to remember the motions of chewing and swallowing from scratch. Each bite seemed to hurt him, his stomach cramping around food. After 3 days of nothing. But he finished. Every scrap, every drop of grease licked from his small fingers. And then he looked at me. Not at the stranger who'd occupied his father's body. Not at the bloody, broken man slumped against the wall. He looked at me. Minjun looked at his father, and something shifted in those two large eyes. "Thank you, Father." 3 words. A child's voice, rough from disuse, trembling with exhaustion and relief. The impact drove through my chest like a blade. I wasn't the man who'd lost everything in a training accident anymore. I wasn't a survivor clinging to borrowed existence, detached from family that wasn't mine. Those 3 words made it real. Made him real. Made the woman tending meat over a dying fire real. I was a father now. I had a son who'd spoken to me for the first time. I had a wife who trusted me enough not to ask where the meat came from. And I had something no martial artist in this godforsaken world possessed. A storage space that could hide anything, preserve anything, make me invisible to the rules that governed everyone else. Sunny came to me. After Minjun fell asleep, his belly full for the first time in days. She brought water from the canteen, my canteen now, and clean cloth torn from something we couldn't afford to lose. Her hands were gentle, as she unwrapped my wounded arm clinical, as she assessed the damage. "These are teeth marks," she whispered. "Yes, and the blood on your clothes. The jacket you're wearing." Her fingers paused over the Wulsung military insignia I'd forgotten to remove. "This belonged to a soldier." "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled softly between us, and I could hear Minjun's breathing even out into true sleep. The deep, healing rest of a child whose body finally had fuel to repair itself. "The soldier who owned this jacket, Sun E, said carefully, 'Did he have a dog?' My throat tightened. 'Why do you ask?' "Because I recognized the patrol patterns." She kept her voice low, barely above a breath. "The man who circled back through the western woods every 3rd day. The one with the huge black hound that terrified the children." She knew. She'd known from the moment I walked through the door. "His name was listed when the sergeant organized the raid," Sun E continued. "I heard the assignments. 8 soldiers under Sergeant Heisen's command, each responsible for a different sector. The one you killed," she didn't flinch from the word, "was Corporal Gesturin, the sergeant's cousin." The blood in my veins went cold. When Heisen realizes his cousin is missing, when he finds the dog's remains, when he puts together that someone in this village killed one of his men, Sunny's hands pressed harder against my wound, and I couldn't tell if the pressure was medical necessity or desperate emphasis. "He will tear Hyukshin apart. He will interrogate every survivor. And when he discovers it was you, he won't just kill you. He'll make an example. Your death will take days, and he'll force me and Minjun to watch every moment of it." I should have felt fear. Should have felt the weight of my mistake crushing down on me. Instead, I felt the storage space pulse behind my navel. That impossible void where time stood still and physics meant nothing. "Then I'll have to kill him first." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Sunny stared at me, as if I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But as I looked at Minjun, sleeping peacefully for the first time since the raid, I realized the truth that would define everything that came. After, I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't surviving. I was hunting. And somewhere in the darkness of the Ashfall woods, Sergeant Vokheisen was about to learn that the most dangerous predator in this war-torn land wasn't a cultivator with decades of chi training. It was a father with nothing left to lose, and a power that didn't exist in any martial manual ever written. The hunt had only begun, and deep in my storage space, nestled between preserved meat and stolen supplies, something stirred again. That presence I'd felt after my first kill, that sleeping beast that had caught the scent of blood. It wasn't sleeping anymore. It was watching,